All right, folks, I'm going to give you a quick review, just the basics of biochemistry for AP Bio. First off, we have the top 5 topics of biochemistry, and they're going to be number 1, the 4 organic macromolecules, number 2, enzymes, number 3, ATP, number 4, a brief review of the properties of water, and number 5, pH. Number 1, the 4 organic molecules. So all living things are basically made up of 4 substances: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids. To be considered organic, you must have carbon and hydrogen. That's kind of the definition for biology. Of those 4, carbohydrates, basically divided into 2 categories: the monosaccharides, which are sugar, and the polysaccharides, which we know as starches. We think of sugars as being very sweet. They're usually very small, simple molecules. And then polysaccharides generally don't taste sweet to humans. They're longer, more complex, chained together groups of monosaccharides. Basically, carbohydrates are thought of as energy and energy storage molecules. So the reason why we eat is because we need to convert that energy into usable energy for our cells. Our food is full of carbohydrates. We also use carbohydrates for some structures. Specifically, plants use cellulose to build cell walls. We can't digest that cellulose, and that's why when we eat plants with lots and lots of cell wall, that fiber passes through our body and helps keep us healthy. Examples of carbohydrates are going to be all the oses, all the sugars: glucose, sucrose, fructose, galactose, and then all the starches: glycogen, cellulose, amylose, amylopectin. Lipids are the next group, 3 major categories: the triglycerides, which is going to be all your major fats, waxes, and oils. Think earwax, think skin oil. And phospholipids. Those are the ones that make up cell membranes. And then finally, steroids. Steroids are the weirdest group from here. They only really fit here because they're also not big fans of water, and they're ring-shaped molecules rather than long chains. Basically, we think of lipids as long-term energy storage molecules. They have other functions too: insulation, cushioning, cell membranes, cell signaling. For example, testosterone is a lipid-based hormone, and it's able to pass through our cells very easily because it is lipid-based. That's a steroid. Not all steroids involve bulking up illegally for Olympics. Next category is going to be the proteins. Proteins are chains of amino acids. Amino acids are little molecules with an amino group and a carboxyl group. And then when a chain of amino acids forms, it specially folds to carry out a particular function. Typically, proteins are used for things like structure. So our hair, nails, skin, muscles are mostly protein. But also they have functional uses as well. Enzymes are a really famous one, and I'll talk more about those later. And other functions like immune protection, antibodies is a really good example of a functional protein. Other examples of proteins. So keratin is the main protein found in our skin, hair, and nails. If you boil it down, you make gelatin. Actin and myosin are found in the muscles and allow for contraction. There's many, many others, not to mention all the types of enzymes. The next category and last category is nucleic acids. Nucleic acids have 2 major types: DNA and RNA. Basically, these long molecules are made up of smaller pieces called nucleotides, which have a nitrogenous base and then a sugar and a phosphate group, and they chain up to form that familiar double helix that you know from DNA, or the single helix typically from RNA. So basically all they do is they carry around genetic information. So in our cells, the nucleus is full of long strings of DNA that tell our cells how to make proteins and carry out functions. Enzymes. Enzymes are a type of protein, and they're made of protein, and they are really, really essential in living cells to lower activation energy, the energy needed to make a reaction happen. I like to think of them as coupons that reduce the cost of a reaction. By doing that, we can actually carry out reactions that would maybe require too much heat or too much other energy that our cells wouldn't be able to do. So take away enzymes and you really can't do anything. Enzymes, like I said, are made of protein. Their correct shape is essential. If they lose that shape, they stop functioning. They typically carry out one specific reaction or a group of very closely related reactions. For example, lactase enzyme breaks down lactose sugar, and that's all it really does. Enzymes can build things, break things, and transform molecules. They don't have to always break stuff down, but those digestive enzymes tend to be the ones we think of. Function can be lost if an enzyme is denatured. Denaturing means to alter or destroy an enzyme's shape, which then in turn causes it to lose its function. Things that denature enzymes would be changes in temperature or pH. They're very, very specific. So for example, an enzyme in your stomach would not work very well in your blood due to the change in pH, or an enzyme in your brain can be denatured by an extremely high fever. So here's a little diagram that just shows how enzymes work. You can see our enzyme on the left over here. The substrate's waiting to go into the active site in the center. It has bound. This is known as the enzyme substrate complex. And usually something happens in the active site to change that substrate into a product. As you can see on the right, the product is being released from the enzyme. And now the enzyme has been unaffected by the reaction. Its active site is the same way it's always been. So now it's going to go back over to the image on the left and start all over again, over and over and over again until it runs out of substrate, denatures, or something else happens that turns it off. Number 3, ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. It's the primary energy storage molecule in cells. It's actually a type of nucleotide. And the reason why it's triphosphate is because there are 3 phosphate groups when this molecule is storing energy. And then when a phosphate group is broken off, it releases a large amount of energy that can be used by the cell. Every time we process a sugar molecule, we strip the energy from that sugar through cellular respiration, and then we use it and load it up onto ATP molecules until we're actually going to do something in the cell. Number 4, properties of water. We've been learning this since we were little kids, but the scientific reason for why water acts the way it does is water is a polar molecule. That means that one side is more positively charged than the other side. That's because the electrons spend the majority of their time around the oxygen of water and not around the hydrogens. So the oxygen side is fairly negative and the hydrogen side is fairly positive. This causes water to act sticky. That's not a very scientific term, but water tends to adhere to other things, including water. It easily forms connections known as hydrogen bonds. Basically, the charged end of one molecule is attracted to the charged end of the other molecule, and in this case, it's water. So water does not play well with anything that is nonpolar. So things like oil, that's why if you try to mix oil and water, they won't. That polar, nonpolar is actually what keeps our cells safe by having lipid-based cell membranes. Some of the other properties of water that you might remember: cohesion. Water easily bonds with other water. Adhesion, which is where water kind of sticks to other substances. And then some of the properties that come from those: surface tension. Whenever you have a puddle or a droplet, the water molecules at the surface hang together really closely. That's why it forms that orb or that dome shape. You can rest small objects on top. They're not floating, but you can rest like a paperclip on top of clean water. Capillary action is where water moves through very small spaces. The most famous example is paper towels. There are little tiny spaces between the fibers of that paper towel, and that allows the water to move through. Things that don't have as many spaces, like notebook paper, are not going to allow as much water through as the looser holes of the paper towel. But it's something that we use to our advantage. Water is less dense in its solid form. Water expands as it freezes, and that's a really important idea. That's why if water gets down into cracks and sidewalks and things like that, it's going to get worse over time. But yeah, it's that change in density. That's why a lake is usually going to have ice on the top and not underneath. It, in fact, insulates the water underneath, which is kind of interesting. It won't freeze below that. And then high specific heat, or the high heat of vaporization. It takes a lot of energy to heat water and convert it to a gas. And that's something that's really important for homeostasis, this idea of internal maintenance of a body. So, for example, we utilize a property known as evaporative cooling by sweating, by producing water from pores in our skin. As that water goes to vaporize off of our skin, it draws heat and we feel cooler, which is great. Awesome. Feel hot and not sweating enough, you can actually splash water on the hottest parts of your body, like your wrists and your neck, and that will help to increase that cooling effect. Animals that don't sweat often do this by rolling in the mud or spraying water on themselves or some other alternative to evaporative cooling. Finally, the last topic is pH. pH measures the concentration of hydrogen ions in a solution. It's not technically the measurement of acidity, it's the measurement of hydrogen ions. That's where the name comes from. But as a factor of that, you can figure out the acidity of a substance. The pH scale runs from 0 to 14, with 7 in the middle. The higher the H plus ion concentration, the lower the pH would be. It's an inverse scale. So the lower the pH, the more acidic we consider a substance to be. Think orange juice, think vinegar. On the flip side, the lower the H plus concentration, the less H plus that's floating around in a solution, the higher the pH is going to be. We're going to get those numbers above 7, and we're going to consider that a base. This is going to be a lot of your cleaning products like bleach and ammonia. And then finally, if you have a pH of 7, which is actually where most of the H plus is being bound up into water all of the time, then we call that neutral. The best neutral is pure water. Human blood comes in fairly neutral. We're right in that 7.35 to 7.45 range. But it's pretty rare to find water that is not either fairly acidic or fairly basic because of the things that dissolve into it, the solutes. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. That is 5 quick topics for biochemistry.